Well, hello, students of philosophy. This is your instructor. I'm K.D. Borcoman. I hope everything's going well for you this semester. Students of psychology, students of ethics, students of environmental philosophy and environmental psychology need to take into consideration some questions I'm about ready to provide you with. Also, a little exploration in going out to the desert and actually meditating upon some important themes that have to do with intrinsic value as opposed to instrumental value. But we've had a chance to be able to discuss in previous sessions the meaning of these terms, and of course there is no univocal sense that can be given to either intrinsic value or, for that matter, instrumental value, but they clearly can be categorized as distinct terms. Now, I'd like to think about a couple of things as you're watching the video, and then we'll go over and repeat a couple of the questions that emerged from our little meditative experience in Joshua Tree. Now, get ready to take some notes, and also what I'm going to be asking you to do is next week when we have our next session, is to do your own YouTube video. Try to surpass, it shouldn't be too difficult to do, my own effort. Try to find a natural, wild place, and I'll go into a little bit more detail a little bit later on that. But let's take a look at this little video just to give you an idea of what I'd like you to do for your video journal. We're now going to try to do some application sharing.
Okay. The philosophical question I'm going to be posing to you is, do rocks have value? Do rocks have instrumental value, or do rocks have intrinsic value, or is there some combo package of both that applies to rocks? Now, this could be true of other things, but I'm going to concentrate for a moment on rocks. I'm here at Joshua Tree, making one of my many trips to the Southland and back again. And this is a national monument. It has quite a proliferation of different rock formations. There are cacti, mesquite bushes, other flora which I'm going to attempt to identify at some point in time here. But that is my question. I'd like it to be a leading question at some point in time, something that we might be able to discuss together as a group in dialogue. We'll call it the Rock Dialogue. Now let me give you a quotation from a famous philosopher. So here's what the famous philosopher Holmes Wollstonee III has to say. To say that N is valuable means that N is able to be valued if and when human valuers, otherwise known by Holmes Wollstonee as HS, stands for human valuers, come along. But N has these properties whether or not humans arrive. So those rocks that you happen to be looking at right now, according to Holmes, have value. Faced, for example, with trilobite fossils, we conclude that the trilobites were potentially intrinsically valuable. By this account, there is no actual value ownership autonomous to the valued and valuable trees, canyons, trilobites, or in our case, rocks. There is a value ignition when humans arrive. Intrinsic value, in the realized sense, emerges relationally with the appearance of the subject generator. So the subject generator would be human beings, according to Holmes. So if we try to take this view that some things could have intrinsic value, that means that they would essentially be valuable without humans around or some kind of a valuing agent. Then we can say that these rocks, of course, have value. Now, what you have to do is imagine that there are no human beings or other sentient creatures that are able to value the rock. But what Holmes Wollstonee seems to be saying here is that there is a sense in which, because of the fact that I and you, looking at rocks such as this, are able to discern the fact that they probably have some value even despite the fact that we weren't here, then it seems to suggest that when we come on the scene and actually value something, that there is a quote-unquote value ignition. We are in a position to be able to appreciate the intrinsic value of the rock, and were we not around, or anybody for that matter, the rock or rocks would still be of value. somehow. Now you might say, or ask the question, what is the value of a rock if there is no human agent, no ignition, so to speak, between the rock and the individual entity that is able to perceive that rock? That's a very good question, and it's one, it seems to me, that should plague people in environmental ethics to some extent. So this is a bit of a thought experiment, and I hope that you will, to some extent, ponder it and perhaps consider what kinds of things actually have a value and would have value if there were no value ignition. Again, this value ignition concept, this means that somehow there is a stimulus to our evaluation, aesthetically at the very least, and quite possibly morally.
Okay, that should be enough for now. That can get us started, I hope, on a good conversation about intrinsic value. And certainly we have to talk about intrinsic value to some extent, in contrast with terms that are generally construed to be in polar opposition in terms of context and meaning. But let's go ahead and proceed with our little presentation here. I want you, first of all, to do your utmost to try to think about what intrinsic value is, and also to try to provide a definition, if you possibly can, by looking through a variety of sources. Now, of course, Wikipedia, if you happen to have access to the internet, is a fine place to start, but it's not the place to end. It should get you started on your exploration of this term, intrinsic value. Instrumental value. A good example of instrumental value would be the standard case that we all talk about to use as an illustration, money. Usually, but of course I'd never be one inclined to say that is always the case, but usually it is the case that we treat money as a means to an end. We don't want to just have money. Now, I grant you there may be people that hoard it, and perhaps from their own subjective orientation they find the simple having of money of intrinsic value, or that the money itself somehow is intrinsically valuable. Of course, this brings us to a concern about just what it is exactly you're valuing when you have a piece of paper before you that presumably represents something else, like gold or silver, uranium, something. Money is then generally construed to be an instrumental value. It is appropriate to have money so that you can go on to do other things, like take a good vacation, buy a nice car, attract friends, network responsibly, get a beautiful house, things like that. So money is not in and of itself generally construed to be intrinsically valued. It's construed to be instrumentally valued. I'm sure you have a very good idea of what that means. Now, when we value something, as my little meditative, I hope, video was attempting to get at, do we value something, or does something have value because of sentient entities such as human beings and their abilities to be able to provide value? In other words, we have consciousness, we have sentience as human beings. Certainly, that is not restricted, by the way, those characteristics and features to the human condition. It could be that there are extraterrestrial beings that are well equipped to be able to value the environment. It could be that some animals, that like pets, for example, that you yourself have encountered, perhaps domesticated animals or wild animals. Perhaps they have similar equipment, organically, so to speak, to be able to evaluate or give value to the environment. But one of the readings that has been cited here, that comes from one G.E. Moore, famous 20th century philosopher, tends to negate the idea that human beings and sentient entities in general are required for there to be intrinsic value. Again, intrinsic means that something has value in and of itself, regardless of whether or not anybody or anything is around to value it. Now, because it's such a potentially complex issue, and I'm sure filled with all sorts of roadblocks, obstacles to complete lucid definition, I encourage you to ponder in your meditative moments what intrinsic value is and whether or not, indeed, it must be the case that there's something like a human being to be around to value something. That famous G.E. Moore passage, which you probably have already read about, invites the reader to consider two worlds, one of which is incredibly beautiful, another of which is got contamination, trash, nuclear waste. G.E. Moore seems to think it's just obvious that the world that's pristine with wonderful waterfalls, etc., is intrinsically more valuable, or better than, at the very least, the world that is filled with contaminants. And he would argue whether or not there are human beings around. You can imagine a situation in which there's not a human being around, can't you? Or is that a logical contradiction? One wonders if it's not a conundrum at start. But at the very least, I want you to think about these issues and look at these references. Holmes Ralston, Aldo Leopold, of course, who wrote the famous land epic, Henry David Thoreau. Good place to start is Walking, but Walden's Pond is excellent. John Muir has many, many musics on the intrinsic value of nature from both a naturalist perspective as well as a slightly spiritualistic perspective. And I think it's probably discovered that when you read Muir, the answer for him to my question is really very easy. And of course, President Theodore Roosevelt, he was instrumental in helping to develop the national park system back in the early 1900s. So I would recommend that you get a hold of some writing. Now, what do I want you to do next time? Well, that should be pretty easy. Try to find something that you would regard as the natural environment. And I want you to try to keep a video journal. Most of you have access to the kind of equipment that would behoove you, so to speak, to be able to accomplish this task that I'm assigning you, but it should be fun. You can use your iPhone, you can use your touch, you can use a small video camera to do this, or borrow something from someone. Of course, I don't want to be too restrictive here. If you really can't put your hands on some sort of apparatus that's going to enable you to be able to take pictures, videos, then at least do the standard modality, and that is write out a journal. And I'll be asking you to present your findings at our next Illuminate session. I'd like you to email me in between times, between now and next week, and just let me know when you think you're going to be ready to go. Thank you for joining me. I certainly do look forward to seeing your work. Bye-bye now.